Good morning to everybody on the webinar so far. Thank you for joining us. We are just waiting for a couple of minutes because we can see quite a few people still join in at present. So like I said, we're just going to give it a couple of minutes for the rest to join on, and then we'll get started.
I know you can't all answer back, but I hope you're all fit and well. I had a great response to this webinar, folks. So there were around 150 people wanting to join it. We are just going to give the maximum amount of time for people to log on, but at the same time, we're not going to drag it on because we know you're all busy people and got lots of things to do. So bear with us. We'll just wait till we've got a reasonable number of people on versus the people that have actually registered. The numbers are sort of going up quite rapidly. So something on Facebook today, someone said it's Wednesday, was it Wednesday, March the 56th or something. It certainly feels like the months are dragging, even though obviously we've only been in this weird scenario for a few weeks. I think we'll give it a few more minutes, guys. Sorry for the delay. We're sort of getting the numbers up, so whilst people are still coming on, we'll just give it a few minutes. Apologies also for the error from webinars point of view. They sent out a note that said it started at 6 AM EDT. So we did send a note out making people aware, but I hope you weren't caught out with that one. So I'm sort of hoping a load of people didn't log on at 6 AM way before when I want to be talking to people on the webinar.
Okay, right. I think we could probably go ahead and get started now. We've got quite a lot of people, so welcome to those of you that have joined just recently. I'm going to hand over, first of all, just to Duncan Turner, and then I'll be speaking to you later on.
Thanks, Zoe. Welcome to the webinar. It's a simple guide to furlough workers and the coronavirus job retention scheme. Your questions answered. Yeah, I'm sure you'll have been reading an awful lot about this and lots of different things in the press, lots of different things in the news. There's government advice and guidance, etc., out there. But what we wanted to do is to provide you guys with the best guide that we can all understand, because there's a lot to think about and an awful lot to get wrong if you're not careful. So So I can't see your presentation moving. So can you flick it onto the agenda?
Okay. Yep, that's the screen that we're on.
Yeah. I can't see that. Bear with us, folks. Yeah, all I can see is a simple guide to furlough workers and retention.
Okay, so just bear with me 1 second.
Okay.
How about now?
Here we go. Super. Okay, so the agenda for the day, we'll just give you a very brief introduction. We won't take too long with that because actually you want to get into the detail and understand what this is all about, right? Secondly, we'll talk about what is furlough. This is a new word for many of us, and it's a word that I'm sure you're getting sick of the sound of, and as soon as this whole crisis is gone, hopefully this word will disappear as quickly as the virus, frankly. We'll then talk to you about layoff and short-time working. And the reason we're doing that is to give you some background information so that you can further understand what the furlough scheme is all about, because the furlough scheme itself is a brand new scheme developed specifically for this coronavirus, but the background to it and the basis of it is all built around layoff and short-time working legislation. So we'll give you a bit of an overview of that. We'll then talk about how to manage layoff and furlough workers. We will talk about the coronavirus job retention scheme itself and how to apply for it. We'll also talk to you about self-employment income support scheme. So for those of you that are self-employed, it's a separate scheme that the government has launched that hopefully will provide you with some support through this period. A bit on what's next, and then we'll have a section on questions and answers. So we've already been asked a number of questions that have been sent through prior to the webinar, so we'll answer some of those off. And also you can ask questions throughout the webinar, and we'll try and answer as many of those off as we can. Any questions that we struggle to get, we will provide an opportunity to follow up with you afterwards, and we'll also provide an opportunity for you to get a free consultation with us to talk to us more specifically about your personal situation if it helps you out. So through the deck we'll be able to show you how to do that. So if we get started, our introduction, we're Harwood HR Solutions. We're a HR consultancy business that supplies HR advice and support for basically SMEs. So we provide an outsourced HR service. We have a number of retained clients that we've been helping and supporting through this period. And given the amount of activity and support and help we've been having to give our clients, we felt that it would be a useful opportunity to go out there and actually look to support more people. So there are lots of HR companies do what we do, but we've decided to go out and help as many people as we possibly can. And if we make a few friends along the way, then hey, great, fantastic. So feel free to pop onto our website whenever you want to pop onto our website. We've also got an email there. If you want to throw any questions our way, then do so. And as I've said before, there is also a link through this presentation that we'll send you as well. So, okay, that's a bit about us. So what is furlough? Okay, so if you actually look at the meaning of furlough in the dictionary, it says leave of absence. Furlough is actually not a UK term, or not a term that's been widely used in UK legislation. It's an American term, and what it basically means in America is sending people home due to a reduction in demand for their work with no pay. So you furlough an employee because you've had a reduction in demand, and you send them home with no pay. In the UK, we haven't used this term because in the UK we have different legislation to handle this type of situation. And that typically is what we call layoff, and also short-time working. So we will go on to explain layoff in a second, and short-time working and how they interact. But furlough, therefore, is a brand new scheme created by the government and the HMRC to support businesses through this current coronavirus nightmare that we're going through. And it's specifically been called furlough because the government have basically offered the support to employees that ordinarily will have been put on layoff or unpaid leave, or were still made redundant as a result of the coronavirus. So it's a scheme that's been developed for businesses that have been impacted by the virus in order to get some support for those people that ordinarily may have been made redundant. Hence why it's called furlough. And the reason they haven't called it layoff is because layoff is slightly different, and we'll come into that. What is important to also mention is that whilst there's lots of similarities with layoff, they have said that, look, this is the furlough scheme, but also it needs to comply with employment legislation. So one of the things that I will mention here, and one of the most important things to bear in mind, is that the underlying advice on this scheme from the government so far is that it's for businesses that have been impacted by COVID-19 coronavirus. So if your business has not been impacted, it's business as usual, you've lost no revenue, then you shouldn't be making claims on this scheme. If your business has been impacted, then tick, it is potentially for your business to benefit from. The other piece is that when an individual is on furlough, the legislation around layoff comes into play, because actually if somebody is on layoff for 4 consecutive weeks, then ultimately that employee can then request to be made redundant and be provided with statutory redundancy pay. So it's 4 consecutive weeks, or 4 weeks in 6 of being laid off. So ordinarily, if you're on layoff, they can come to you and say, look, I've been off for 4 weeks, can I be made redundant? The way the government have got around this is said, look, actually, you know what, we're going to send people on furlough. That right hasn't gone away for those employees, but because we're going to offer them up to 80% of their salary, and given the current climate, it's highly unlikely that employees are going to come back and ask to be made redundant after 4 weeks. And I have to say, I would agree, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility that an employee may come and ask to be made redundant. So we thought we'd just give you that warning. The other thing to mention here, of course, is I don't know whether many of you have been watching the news, etc., but there's a gentleman called Martin Lewis, who's a money-saving expert guy. He's been very vocal on the internet, telling people who and who can't.
Hi, Duncan. Bear with us just one moment. I think that Duncan's connection may have just dropped. Oh, I think we're back. Duncan, are you back?
Oh, yeah, am I back?
You're back.
Oh, I'm really sorry for
Bear a minute.
Okay, wait, what did you last hear, Zoe?
Just as you're just talking about Martin Lewis had just started to give some advice around who can and can't be placed on furlough.
Okay, yeah. So we'll go on to a bit of what's right and wrong around what Martin Lewis has said, but he's not all wrong, but there's some things in there to bear in mind. So let's move on to layoff and short-time working. So layoff is basically where an employee is laid off during a particular week if the employer does not have sufficient work for the employee and the employee is not paid as a result. So under normal circumstances outside of this coronavirus, a company has a reduction in demand for work, then potentially they can lay off employees. Now, the key to this one is that that's easily done if there is an express term in the contract to allow you to lay off individuals. But in most cases, there isn't an express term, and therefore companies will have to consult with employees in order to gain agreement with them to be laid off. And normally, the alternative is redundancy. So if you've got a particularly bad situation with your business, and you're turning around to your employees and saying, look, actually, you know what, the alternative might be closure or redundancies, and as a result, look, we'd rather lay you off. That's the basis for the consultation, and then you gain agreement, get them to sign an agreement, and then you can lay them off. Okay. If there isn't, if you have it in the contract, you can lay off without consultation. Short-term working, or short-time working rather, it occurs where you don't need to lay people off for the whole day, week, but you can cut back their hours and give them reduced hours with reduced pay. And again, it requires employees to agree to that. So there will need to be some form of consultation with the employees in order to get that agreed. So this is outside of coronavirus, and this is the normal employment legislation around what you can and can't do, layoff and short-time working. Okay, with both of those, as I've said earlier, if people have been laid off or their short-time working is less than 50% of their normal work, then after 4 weeks they can request to be made redundant with statutory redundancy pay. Okay, so that's layoff and short-time working. So if we move on. So when you are laid off or on short-time working, there is a statutory guarantee payment, and most employees are eligible for that for a workless day. And this is where it's not a great amount of money, which is why the government has stepped in. So that payment is limited to 5 days in a 3-month period. Okay, and the current rate is £29 a day, so it's barely going to get your groceries in. And then any work completed, even outside of normal working hours, results in that no longer being a workless day. So that is your basic layoff short-time work agreement that was in place, and hence why the government felt it necessary to bring in this new furlough agreement to try and retain jobs during this difficult time. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as we've said, if they do decide after 4 weeks to resign and claim statutory redundancy, they can do that, and then employees must have been laid off on short-time working for 4 consecutive weeks, or a total of 6 weeks, or 4 weeks out of 6 weeks. Sorry. So that's what we've already covered. So let's move on from that slide. Okay, so just to repeat, if you've got a contract clause in your contract, you can just enforce this. If there's no clause, and there's a policy that exists, then you can consult with employees to gain consent. Explain the reason for the need to furlough and the potential outcome if you cannot gain their consent. Provide the employee with a written agreement stating the justification, proposed dates and detail around pay, etc. So this is where we start to go into furlough and how it mirrors layoff. So with the new furlough agreement, the government is saying that you need to follow employment legislation to put it in place. So if you don't have a layoff clause in your contract, which most of you won't, then you need to consult with your staff and gain consent in order to put them on furlough. Really important, this. Now, you really need to make a judgment call and know your people. So if you've got a business where you've got less than 20 people, you know them all very well, you've got an obvious decline in demand, or you've had to close your doors, then your justification is really quite straightforward, and you talk to your staff and say, guys, look, we've got no choice, we've had to close the business, or we've been massively impacted. The options I have here are either to send you home with no pay, or to make you all redundant because we've got no trade, or I can put you on furlough, which is where I can actually claim back 80% of your salary for you. So we'll send you home, you get 80% of your salary on furlough. The employee is highly likely to agree to that given the current climate. So from a consultation perspective, our advice in that situation is to talk to your staff, get them to explain the situation. The consultation period can be shortcut in order to get the agreement. You can provide them with a furlough agreement for them to sign, and if you haven't got one, we can provide one for you. And as long as they sign, you can send them off on furlough. If your business is slightly more complicated or slightly more militant, or you have more than 20 people, the only thing I would urge you here is just to urge caution around consultation. Certainly, if there's more than 20 people, you might find that you need to be forced into collective consultation. So if your employees are going to be difficult in terms of signing the agreement, you may have to collectively consult, which means that you've got to arrange for a process for people to elect representatives. They nominate who they want to represent them. You then go into consultation with elected representatives. You agree the terms of the elected representatives, and then you get into individual consultation with individuals. And it's a bit of a longer-winded process, but failure to consult in that situation means that employees can actually sue you for breach of contract and non-payment of wages. So I don't want to scare you to death with it, but know your business. If your business is going to be a bit militant, if it's a bit tricky, if you're talking large numbers of people, then my advice is to reach out and ask for some advice on that consultation process. If it's a slightly more less complex business, you know your people, less than 20, you should be able to shortcut the consultation process pretty easily and get them to sign the agreement and send them off. Okay. Now, whilst they're on furlough, something to mention, employees will still accrue statutory annual leave and their statutory contract rights, if I can say it. So whilst they're away, they will still accrue annual leave. Now, what the government has done is, for those individuals that haven't been able to take all of their annual leave during the year because of the coronavirus, the government is allowing companies to roll over 20 days or 4 weeks of that annual leave over the course of the next 2 years. So what that means is that instead of you having to cram all of their holiday in at the end of this year, and or pay it out or whatever, to help you with cash flow and to help you to manage your holiday situation, you can roll that over the next 2 years. The other piece to mention here is that once an individual is on furlough, they have to remain on furlough for 3 weeks. If you bring them back before the 3 weeks, then you will not get the funding for the furlough. So they have to be off for 3 weeks. If work then turns up after 3 weeks, then you can bring them in to do work. They then stop being on furlough, because anybody on furlough cannot be doing any work for you. So if you're sending people home to work on laptops, they're not furloughed. If people are working from home, they're not furloughed. Furlough employees, just to reiterate, they're only furloughed if there is no work for them to do. So you can switch people around. So for example, if you've got 6 sales guys and you've only got work for 3, you can send 3 sales guys off on furlough, bring them back after 3 weeks, send the next 3 off for 3 weeks. So you can switch around like that, but they have to be off for a minimum of 3 weeks in order for you to claim back the 80%. Just to reiterate, employees must not carry out any work during a period of layoff or furlough. This is meant to be an alternative to redundancy. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so the coronavirus job retention scheme. So what can you claim? So as long as your business has been impacted by the coronavirus, whether that's loss of revenue, loss of demand, suppliers can't send you goods, you've had to close the store because you're a retail outlet, you've had to close your pub, you've had to close your restaurant, hotel, then there's a justification. You have been impacted by the coronavirus. And as a result, you have a number of employees where you simply do not have work for them to do. And it's not possible to have them working from home. Then you can claim a grant of 80% of an employee's wages, up to £2,500 per month per person that you place on furlough. On top of that, the government will also pay, or HMRC will also pay, NI and pension contributions. Okay. The employee must be furloughed and do no work for the employer. So who can claim? So any UK organisation can basically apply as long as you have been impacted. So that includes businesses, charities, recruitment agencies that have agency workers paid through PAYE, and public authorities, so schools, council offices, etc., etc. It is not thought that the public sector would need to make use of it for obvious reasons, because those are the guys out there at the minute fighting this deadly situation for us, and it's unlikely that they're going to have people with nothing to do. Okay, next. Okay, so eligibility. There's no restriction to employment status. So basically, an employee doesn't need 1, 2, 3, 4 years worth of service with you to benefit from this. The only piece in terms of being on payroll is they needed to have been on your payroll on the 28th of February 2020. So in other words, they needed to have had a month's service prior to the start of this scheme. The scheme started on the 1st of March and is rolling for 3 months currently. So effectively, this will end at the end of May. Hopefully at the end of May, we're getting somewhere back to normal and we won't need it. But if we're still in this mess at the end of May, the government will advise on whether they're extending it or not. So as long as your employees have been on PAYE on the 28th of February or 29th, because leap year, then they are eligible. So they're eligible if they're full-time, part-time, on agency contracts, or indeed if they're on flexible contracts like flexible working or 0-hour contracts. Okay. If you have had an employee on your payroll after February 2020, they will not be eligible for furlough. So in that situation, you can either send them home on full pay, negotiate with them on being sent home with layoff pay, or regrettably, you can terminate their contract reasonably safely because of their length of service. And again, to do that, just reach out for some advice. But unfortunately, those guys are, potentially are up what's it creek without a paddle. So there's no qualifying service for, requirement to an employee to be furloughed. So the next one, employees that are shielding. So employers who are at very high risk of severe illness from coronavirus and are therefore advised to shield themselves for at least talk around this one. This is one of the questions that Martin Lewis was raising. He's gone on and said, if you are shielding, you are definitely eligible for furlough. But let me just clarify this. In order for the company to claim the furlough relief, then it needs to be impacted by the coronavirus. Okay, so just because somebody has been sent home for 12-week shielding doesn't necessarily mean you can claim it back. You can only claim it back if your business has been impacted. Otherwise, the people that have been sent home shielding, you need to be sending them home on full pay. Now, the chances are your business will have been impacted, so you can actually claim for furlough for people that are shielding. But I just want to make sure you're aware that the underlying principle with this is that your business needs to have been impacted. And when HMRC come in and review this and audit businesses afterwards, don't be surprised if they say, well, show me evidence that your business was impacted. Okay, I don't know how they're going to audit this, but they say that they're going to. So one of the things is, have you been impacted? Yes, I have. This individual has been sent home by the government to protect themselves because they are particularly high risk. Then you should be okay furloughing them. But if not, just be very careful. And if not, and if your business is cooking along very nicely, then you ought to be sending them off on full pay. Employees who are on sick leave who are self-isolating can be furloughed only after a period of sickness of self-isolation has ended. So in other words, if an individual has had symptoms and they've gone off for 7 days because they've got symptoms and they've been on SSP, or if they are living with family members with symptoms and therefore they're on 14 days self-isolation on SSP. If in that time you are furloughing individuals and their role would have been one you would have furloughed, then they need to finish their period of SSP first, and then you can furlough them once their period of sickness has ended. If your business has not been impacted, and ordinarily you wouldn't have been furloughing these people because you've got work for them, or they can work from home, then you should not be furloughing them. Oh, and by the way, the same thing with the people that are shielding. If you can get work for them to do at home, then you shouldn't be furloughing them. Okay, so Martin Lewis, when he comes out and says anybody that's shielding could be sent off on furlough, not strictly true. They can only be sent on furlough if the business has been impacted by COVID-19, has no work for them to do at home, and as a result, as an alternative, potentially they may have been putting people on layoff or making people redundant. Okay. Another couple for Martin Lewis that he said is he has gone on and said, look, people with childcare issues can be furloughed. Again, not true. They can only be furloughed, again, if there wasn't work for them to do. And then the other crazy one that he mentioned was that if an employee left you after February the 28th, and then the job that they were going to go to has decided not to take them on, then you're perfectly okay to take them back on, shield them, to give them a level of income, then let them go. I would never ever advise that. I'm not sure where that advice is coming from. Two things. One, only take them back if you wanted to take them back and they would be a critical employee for you going forward once we come out of this coronavirus situation. Otherwise, you're taking back on a liability. You're taking someone back on, you're honouring their continued service. You may be giving them 80% of their salary through Corona, but once this is over, you may end up taking the cost and burden and risk of having to make them redundant when actually they'd left you in the first place. So that is one piece of Martin Lewis advice I would avoid. So next slide. Okay, so that, right, so how to apply? Well, we're still waiting for the portal to be open. So basically what you will need to do is you will need to assess what individuals in your business that need to be placed on furlough. So assess your business, has it been impacted, yes or no? Yes, my business has been impacted. Okay, because it's been impacted, what roles ordinarily would I be looking to be making redundant? Okay, I've got 5-6 roles that I need to be made redundant, and I've gone through the justification of why I need to be making those people redundant or put them on furlough. It's easy if you've had to close your business because it's everybody. Okay, so you've identified those individuals, you've then consulted with those individuals about going on furlough, and they've agreed to it and they've signed the agreement and sent it back to you. Then what you do is you alter their salary level on your payroll to 80% of their salary. Bearing in mind, this doesn't include commission, bonuses. This is purely base salary pay, so all wages. So anything that goes monthly through their salary on a monthly basis is 80% of that. Okay. Then once the coronavirus portal is opened on HMRC, you will be able to go on, apply for the job retention scheme support. You would need to work out your calculation. So you'll have to work out how much you want to claim. Many of you will have accountants. I would suggest that you utilize your accountant to help you with that. The HMRC system they're suggesting will allow you to make a claim every 3 weeks. Claims can be backdated to the 1st of March 2020. However, you can only claim back to the 1st of March 2020 if you actually had put people on furlough on the 1st of March 2020 or layoff before the furlough scheme was announced. So if you haven't done that, then you can't backdate to for this March. You can only actually take it from when your furlough agreements have been signed. Remember, minimum period for furlough is 3 weeks. If you've only put people for 2 weeks, they won't pay you. Payment will be made from HMRC via BACS. And again, just to reiterate, employers must calculate the employee's monthly wages. So if we go on to the next slide. Oh, just to reiterate, actually, on wages, there are calculations for irregular hours. So if you're paying people on casual work or 0-hour contracts, then what they're stating is that an employee with irregular hours who has worked for the employee for a full 12 months before the claim, the employer should use the higher of the employee's earnings from the same month in the previous year. So you go back to the previous year, take that amount, or the employee's average monthly earnings from 2019-2020 tax year. Okay, so there's a way of calculating that for those with flexible contracts. Okay, so how to apply? This is what you'll need. You'll need your ePay reference number. You'll need to understand the number of employees that are being furloughed, the claim period, start and end date, the amount that you're going to claim, your bank account number and sort code, contact name of the person making the claim, and phone number. Okay, in order to make the claim. One thing just to bear in mind is that this is an incredibly generous scheme from the government. You're not going to be asked to pay this back, but you will pay it back through your taxes and everyone else's taxes, okay? So at the end of this scheme, whilst it's nice and generous, HMRC have warned that if there are any abuse of the scheme, so i.e. you're sending people home and they're doing work from home and you're claiming for furlough, then that is abuse. If your business hasn't been impacted by COVID-19, but you're still claiming this, that is abuse. Then the HMRC will audit, and if you're found to be abusing the system, then they will fine you and they will make a public announcement that you've been doing it. So they're actually being quite aggressive with saying, look, this is a great offer, but don't take the mickey. The other piece with this, guys, is that as a director of a business, if your business has shut and you are a director and you are an employee of that business, which most of us are, you can claim furlough for yourself, albeit you can only claim for what you put through as PAYE. So you cannot claim a percentage of dividends, expenses, etc. It's purely what you put through PAYE. Also, don't forget, you shouldn't be doing any work whilst you're off on furlough. So whilst they will allow you to do things like statutory reporting and your accounts, you shouldn't be doing anything that is generating revenue. Okay, so look, ultimately, I could go on forever and ever about this furlough scheme, and I'm sure there's things that we haven't covered. So there's a questions piece on the side here. There's, if you look at the top of the screen now, if you wanted a follow-up call with us to talk about things that are more specific for you and your business, please, that's a webinar address there that you can go on, and you can book a slot free with us. So we'll give you an amount of time to go through it. We'll also email you that as well after this webinar. And we'll answer some questions at the end of this slot. So if we move on now, Zoe, to our next slide. So, self-employment income support scheme. Very different to furlough. This is a scheme that has been set up to help those that are self-employed. Now, the first thing I would mention here is that, you know, identify who do they mean self-employed, because I think it's a word that's quite frequently used for people that just run their own businesses. Just for clarity, you're only self-employed if you effectively are running a business and you are either in a partnership or you're freelance, etc. So if you actually are running a limited company and your company is registered as limited, you're not self-employed. In that instance, you're a director of an employee of a limited company, so you're not entitled to this scheme. So if you are self-employed, then the government will provide you with support. The only other thing that is different with this scheme is that this does not require you to be not working. So you do need to show evidence that you have been impacted by the coronavirus, but it will not stop you from working if you get work. So it is a top up, if you like, to support you through this situation. So again, how much is the grant? So if you are eligible and your claim is accepted, the scheme provides you with a taxable grant equal to 80% of your trading profits for the next 3 months. This 80% is deemed via the government looking over the past 3 years of tax returns, or less if you haven't been running for 3 years, and you must have submitted at least one self-employment tax return in 2018, 2019. And taking the average profit amount. Okay, so before we get into brass tacks, there's a huge caveat here. Although you'll be able to apply for the grant in the near future, HMRC aren't paying these grants until June 2020. Okay, so it's it's a little bit far away, but what it's saying is it's support for you for the income that you may have missed over the next 3 months. You won't get it until June 2020, which is why they're also saying carry on working, right? So if you need to borrow money, stick stuff on credit cards and things like this, I'm guessing they're saying do that, and then you'll get this grant to cover stuff off. And at the moment, it will be given as a lump sum in arrears rather than on a monthly basis, okay, to our knowledge at the moment. On top of this, the issue for many will be the word profits, because it's not based on the turnover of your business, okay? So it's actually profit. So what that means is that the amount will be, your turnover will need to be deducted for all your allowable expenses and costs of doing business. But actually you don't need to take out your wage. So your net profit is your revenue minus your expenses in order to drive that revenue will give you a profit. Again, I would advise that you get some accountant help to work this out. So the figure that you submit on your tax return is your taxable profit. And that means that with all the allowable expenses deducted, as a self-employed person, your own net wage, okay, your own net wage is not a deductible expense. If you have deducted your wages to arrive at your net profit, you should add this back in to get your taxable profit, the figure that appears on your tax return. So, for example, if your past 3 years of tax returns are, 16, 17, you had a profit of £10,000, 17, 18, you've had a profit of £12,000, 18, 19, you've had a profit of £15,000, and the average of all of your profits is £12,333.33, and that calculates out at £1,027.77 per month, and they will pay you 80% of that, which is £822.22 a month. Okay. So who is eligible for the grant? So you can apply for the scheme grant if you are a self-employed individual, and you can also be a self-employed member of a partnership that has been adversely affected by the coronavirus. So once again, there's that point. You have to be adversely affected by the coronavirus. You must have submitted your income tax self-assessment tax return for the year 2018-19. You traded in the tax year 1920 and are currently trading when you apply for the scheme and intended to continue trading in the tax year 2021. Okay, so in other words, if you quit doing this your job 2 months ago, then tough. You need to be continuing to trade. Your self-employed trading profits have to be less than £50,000 a year. So if you have trading profits of more than £50,000 a year, you're not going to get this scheme. So when they said that it covers 95% of people in their speech, that means the 5% that they're calculating have profits of more than £50,000 a year. And more than half of your income needs to come from self-employment. So you can claim, if you're partly self-employed and partly working for someone else, then you could end up being furloughed and also claim this. But you need half of your income to come from self-employment to get this grant. Okay, so who's not eligible for the grant? So as I've said already, if you pay yourself a salary and dividends through your own company, then you're not covered. You will be covered by the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. If you have no accounts or filed no tax returns, then you'll not be able to access the scheme. If you have any late tax returns to file, you have until the 23rd of April now to file them, otherwise you will be ineligible. And if your average trading profits were less than 50% of your self-employment income, then you will not be able to get it. So if you're confident you're eligible, then currently the government haven't made it possible to apply yet. However, the government will contact you directly if you are eligible and direct you to the area in which you can apply online. As with most governing bodies, my advice would be not to solely rely on them contact you, but just check regularly on the government website for when they're going to take applications, just as a bit of a tip. Okay, so that is a snapshot of self-employment income support. And again, I'm sure there'll be some questions on that as we go through. So next slide, please. Okay, oh, one back. Hello, folks.
Apologies, I think it just
for
a second. There you go.
Yeah. Okay, right. What next? So guys, look, from this, we're going to have a question session in a minute. We're going to answer as many questions as we can. We clearly aren't going to have time to answer everyone's questions, so we will email everybody that's registered after this, and you will receive a link for a copy of the webinar and the question and answer sheet. So all the questions that have been asked with all the answers on them. We will automatically place you on our mailing list, because as we go through this, we're going to be sending out free advice and guidance and a monthly newsletter, and we promise not to bombard you with anything else. We're not a sales company. For further help, advice and ongoing support on any of this, or indeed any other HR issue topic, then you can book a follow-up call with us on the link below. Okay. So if you want to make a note of that, please do so. but we will also send you the link when we follow up with you after this presentation as well. So without further ado, I've spoken enough. Let's get into the questions. I know this is Zoe. Let's get into a few questions and see how many we can answer off for you in the time that we've got remaining.
Yes, thank you, Duncan. We have had a few questions through before the webinar started, so thank you to those of you that did send those through to us. Like Duncan said, we'll try and get through as many as we can, but don't worry, for any of you your questions that aren't answered, we will, as he said, be answering all of those off on our Q&A sheet, which we will send out to you via email. So first question then. If I furlough employees and cannot take them back when the scheme finishes, as I need to build my business up again, what should I do? I've read I may have to pay back the 80% to the government if I make them redundant. Is this correct? What should I do? Okay, so firstly, no, this is not true. An employer would not be required to repay the grant if the employer's wage has been for where they were furloughed. So no, you won't have to pay that back if you then may go on to make that employee redundant. The HMRC guidance on the scheme states that when the scheme ends, the employers will have to then decide whether employees can return to work or if redundancies are necessary. If redundancies are necessary, then the employer should just go ahead and comply with the normal requirements in relation to giving notice and following the redundancy and consultation period. So when it did confirm the position regarding the redundancies at the end of the scheme, the HMRC didn't actually give any real guidance of what happens on making a furloughed employee redundant while the scheme is still open. It does appear, though, that the employer could terminate an employee's contract for redundancy while they are furloughed, provided, again, that it is following the relevant procedural requirements, so it follows the guidelines of the redundancy process. The next question we've got was, how does the furlough process work for those of us who are employed by our own companies as directors, where we take a modest wage and directors' fees and pay full PAYE? There seems to be a perspective that we are self-employed. So I think Duncan probably has covered this off for us, but again, just to confirm, if you are a director paid through PAYE, you can be furloughed in the same way an employee can and claim through the scheme for the salary entitlements that you pay through PAYE. The directors can still perform those statutory duties, for example, your accounts, payroll, etc., but you cannot perform any revenue generating work. The self-employed individuals are not paid through PAYE. They do not pay tax in the same way an employee does, and they complete a self-assessment return at the end of the year. So if you're a director of a limited company with limited liability, you can follow that furlough process. So I hope that just clears that up for you. Another one, our employees are on 0 hours contracts. It's going to be difficult to furlough employees as we think it will take up to 12 months to be back where we were. Also, one employee only started mid-February. Will he be eligible having worked 5 weeks? Again, we've probably covered some of this off, but in regards to that employee, who started mid-February, if he was on payroll, PAYE, 28th of Feb, yes, he can be placed on furlough. I think given that it's really difficult at the moment to predict what the future holds at this stage, the best option probably is for you to furlough the employees if they're not working, of course, and then review this again at the end of the 3 months. You know, as we've already discussed today, the purpose of the scheme is really to prevent redundancies, and so it might be a little bit too soon to act now. Given that they are on 0 hours contracts as well, it's probably a good idea to understand, are they workers or employees? If they're workers, you would have the option to simply, you know, give notice at the end of the contract. However, if they're employees, then obviously there is going to be a process that you need to follow in regards to providing notice, consultation, etc. The next one, we are a contract flooring company and our labour on site is a mix of PAYE and subcontractors. We are furloughing our employees on PAYE, are we still at liberty to continue to use subcontractor labour on sites that currently remain open while our own PAYE employees are furloughed? Okay, so I think here really you need to consider what you would do in a normal redundancy situation. Ordinarily, the first thing a business should do in this instance would be to look at releasing any contractors first, except in the case, of course, perhaps where that particular expertise is required from them. You really should then look to assess what other roles are removed after that. There could be an argument that if you can't afford to keep employees working, how can you afford to keep the contractors on? So in short, no, there's no liability to keep them. You probably want to familiarise yourself with their contract though, just to check, are they truly contractors? And is there a notice period? But yes, I think you should be releasing those before employees. So the next one. Can an employer rotate which employees are furloughed during the coronavirus crisis? Yes, again, I think we did cover this off previously, but the HMRC stating that the minimum period that you can be furloughed for is 3 weeks. Therefore, if you wanted to look at rotating the employees on 3-week basis, for example, perhaps if you want to try and avoid any disputes over who is on furlough and who isn't. So you could, if you needed some staff to continue working during this time, you could look to rotate those employees on that 3-week basis. Can an employer withdraw a notice of redundancy that was given before the announcement of the scheme? Yes, some employers might have gone ahead and made some decisions pretty quickly as soon as they sort of started facing some financial difficulty before this scheme was announced. So the HMRC guidance does state that these employers can ask employees to agree to a withdrawal of the notice and agree to a period of furlough instead. So if they're on notice, you do need to get the employee to agree to this circumstance, because once you have placed somebody on notice, it is legally binding. So just bear that in mind. But absolutely can have the conversation to check that they would be happy with you withdrawing the notice and placing them on furlough. And similar to that, I think there's another one where employees are made redundant already. Can you make a claim for them under the scheme? So again, the guidance states that employees who are made redundant after the 28th of February are covered by this scheme if they're rehired by the employer. So if the employer maybe acted really fast, made those people redundant, you can look to re-employ them and then place them on furlough, thereby obviously being able to recover the cost of their wages during that time and hopefully have a job for them at the end of it. So I think that's probably us for time today. As I said, we do have a few more questions that have come through as well while we've been talking, so we will make sure that we answer all of those off as well. A couple of you have come back with a couple of questions that really need some extra discussion around them, and I have replied to you on email, so hopefully you have got that, and we will make sure we pick up with you as well. And so really I think that's it for us today. Duncan, I don't know if you've got anything else to add, but otherwise thank you to you all so much for joining us, and if we can be of any further help, please do get in contact.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. My apologies for the temporary sound cut out there, technology and all that. It's great, but then when it goes wrong, it's embarrassing. So my apologies for that. Yeah, but just please reach out. There's 101 different things I'm sure we haven't covered, and I'm sure we haven't dealt with everybody's individual case. But listen, we are offering to give you that practical advice. So please reach out, and we'll stick you on the mailing list. We'll give you some good stuff as we go through and work through this. Everyone stay healthy. Everyone keep positive. This is a temporary situation. We'll all bounce back from it, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future. And have a good day.
Thanks all.